The morning of October 5th arrived quietly, the kind of calm that never hints at the storm that's about to follow. Jessica's alarm went off at 7:45 a.m., and like she always did, she got up on her own. Her mother, Sarah, had just come home from her overnight shift. She was tired, drifting into that half-awake, half-asleep state that always comes after working through the night. But she was still aware enough to hear the soft sounds of her daughter getting ready. Jessica moved around the house with the small confidence of a child who had done this routine many times before. She brushed her hair, put on her glasses, and watched a little television while she waited for her breakfast. There was no rush. Nothing felt unusual or tense. It was just a normal Friday morning in a suburban neighborhood that felt safe, predictable, and familiar. Outside, a thin layer of Colorado's first snow of the season covered the sidewalks. It wasn't deep, just enough to remind everyone that fall was ending. Jessica bundled up, zipped her jacket, and put on her backpack with that same excitement kids get when weather changes and the world looks a little different. Her mother watched her from inside the house, the front door slightly open. Jessica stepped onto the porch, then the sidewalk, then began the short walk she had made so many times before. A mile to school. A routine that felt safe because it had always been safe. Sarah watched her for a few moments as she walked toward the corner, and then the door closed. It should have been just another ordinary start to their day. But this time, something in that brief 60-minute stretch between home and school would go terribly wrong. Jessica never arrived at Witt Elementary that morning. And when the school day began without her, the clock quietly started counting the minutes that no one realized would soon become crucial. For now, though, the world was still unaware that Jessica's walk had been interrupted by someone she should never have crossed paths with, a person no one in the community suspected, a person who blended in, a person who would soon turn an entire town into a place filled with fear. Back at home, Sarah finally fell asleep. She had no reason to think anything was wrong. Jessica always walked with friends at least part of the way. Sometimes she walked alone, but she always made it to school. She always came home. She was responsible, reliable, and proud of taking care of herself. Hours passed without anyone knowing that something unthinkable had happened.
Before we continue, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you never miss a new case. Your support helps these forgotten stories reach more people who care. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? Are you at home, at work, or maybe eating something while listening? I'd love to know.
To truly understand the depth of this tragedy, you have to look again at who Jessica was beyond the timelines and events. She was a child filled with life, and her personality reached everyone around her. At school, teachers described her as bright, cheerful, and always ready to help. She wasn't the loudest kid in the class, but she had a presence that made people trust her. She smiled often. She laughed even more. Her friends said she had a way of making even boring days fun. She could turn a simple walk, a silly song, or a small joke into something memorable. Her love for purple was more than just a preference. It was a piece of her identity. She wore purple, she collected purple things, she even chose purple for her glasses. And when the community later searched for her, the color purple became a symbol of hope. Neighbors tied purple ribbons to street signs, porch railings, and car antenna because they wanted the town to feel like Jessica. They wanted her to feel seen wherever she was. She lived in a modest, single-story home that always seemed busy. The presence of her mother, grandmother, and aunt created a house full of different voices and different generations. It was a home where someone was always cooking, someone was always talking, someone was always bustling around doing something. Jessica fit into that environment perfectly. She was the youngest, but somehow still the one who made everything feel grounded. It's strange how some children, without even trying, manage to become the emotional center of a family. Her mother worked so hard to keep their lives stable. Overnight shifts, early mornings, long commutes. Sarah didn't complain. She did what she had to do. And Jessica understood that in a way most 10-year-olds don't. She didn't fight the routine. She didn't argue about getting up on her own. She didn't complain about walking to school. She embraced it because she knew it helped her mother. That's rare in a child so young. Jessica was, in every sense, a helper. On the wall in her room, she had pictures, drawings, and small reminders of the things she loved: her pets, her friends, her cheerleading dreams. She loved performing, not in a show-offy way, but in that sweet, joyful way only kids can. If music played, she danced. If someone laughed, she laughed too. If someone was sad, she felt it deeply and tried to fix it. Her teacher once said that Jessica is the kind of kid who doesn't just enter a room, she brightens it without knowing she's doing it. The night before she disappeared, nothing seemed unusual. She finished her homework, she played, she got ready for the next morning. The world felt steady then. It felt safe. And if anyone in that house knew it would be the last normal night, they would have held on to it a little longer. They would have lingered a little more. But life never tells you when a moment is the last one. Jessica set her alarm, placed her glasses beside her bed, and drifted to sleep. Tomorrow was Friday. She liked Fridays. She liked the way school felt on Fridays, lighter, happier, full of anticipation for the weekend. She didn't know the danger waiting somewhere along her route. She didn't know a stranger had crossed into her path, and she didn't know that by the time the sun rose, her small, predictable world would be changed forever. And while her mother slept, believing everything was fine, the clock kept moving, minute by minute, step by step, until Jessica Ridgeway disappeared. The truth is, nothing felt unusual that Friday morning. Not to Jessica, not to her mom, not to anyone in that quiet Colorado neighborhood. Nobody could have imagined that a teenager, just 17 years old, was already awake, already driving around the area, already watching children on their way to school. He wasn't passing time, he wasn't bored, he was hunting. And Jessica had no idea she had crossed paths with someone dangerous.
Her morning started exactly the same as every other school day. At 7:45 a.m., her alarm rang. She turned it off herself, climbed out of bed, and headed downstairs. She ate a granola bar while watching a bit of TV, a small moment of comfort before starting her day. Then she went back upstairs to finish getting dressed. Her mother, Sarah, had just come home from another long night shift. She was tired, but she still helped Jessica with the last few things, fixing her jacket, packing her small snack. Together, they peeled an orange for Jessica to take with her. Jessica filled her water bottle, the same water bottle investigators would later identify as important evidence in the case. Her backpack was ready, pink and black, decorated with characters from Victorious, the show she loved so much. The zipper had a little keychain with her name on it. Anyone who knew Jessica knew her favorite color was purple, and that morning, like always, she put on her purple-framed glasses. Outside, the first real snow of autumn was drifting from the sky. Soft flakes, thick and wet, the kind that make a normal street look almost magical. Jessica put on her black puffy jacket with the soft pink lining. She slipped into her black boots, the ones with little pom-poms that bounced when she walked. Before leaving, she made a phone call. She dialed the number of a boy she usually walked with. She asked his father if his son would be going to school that morning. He said yes and told Jessica that his son would wait for her. Jessica promised to meet him. That call, made around 8:25 a.m., became one of the last known moments anyone heard Jessica's voice. At 8:30 a.m., Jessica opened the front door, stepped into the snowy air, and told her mother goodbye. Sarah stood at the window for a moment, watching her daughter walk down the sidewalk, her backpack bouncing lightly behind her. "I watched her walk out the door," she later said, her voice cracking. "I shut the door, and that was the last time I saw her." Sarah had no reason to worry. Jessica had made this walk so many times. The school was close. The route was familiar. She was meeting a friend. It was a safe neighborhood. Everything felt normal. Sarah, exhausted after working all night, went upstairs to sleep. She put her phone in another room because she needed quiet. A college she applied to kept calling, and she didn't want the ringing to wake her. She pulled the blankets up and drifted into a deep sleep. The house fell silent. Outside, Jessica walked through the snow, less than 1,000 feet from her home. She never made it to her friend's house. To understand how quickly everything unraveled, here is the timeline, because every minute matters in a case like this. 8:30 a.m. Jessica leaves home. 8:40 a.m. The friend's father, after waiting 10 minutes, decides she must be running late and drives his son to school. He assumes Jessica walked alone or changed her plans. 8:50 a.m. The school bell rings. 5th grade begins.
Jessica's seat in Ms. Grace's classroom is empty. 10 a.m. The school office calls the number listed for Jessica's mother. The phone rings in an empty room. Sarah, sleeping upstairs, doesn't hear it. A voicemail is left. For the next 6 hours, no one realizes that a 10-year-old girl is missing. Think about those 6 hours. Where was Jessica? Was she scared? Was she calling out for help? Was she already gone? These questions would haunt investigators, and the truth is something only one person ever fully knew. The person who took her. Around 4 p.m., Sarah finally woke up. Still groggy, she reached for her phone and saw the missed call. She listened to the voicemail. Jessica never arrived at school. Sarah's heart dropped. Confusion turned to fear in seconds. Jessica wasn't sick. She didn't stay home. She didn't change her plans. Sarah had watched her leave that morning. Sarah rushed out of the house. She drove to Chelsea Park, a small playground on Jessica's route. No Jessica. She drove to her friend's house. Still nothing. Then she raced to the school just before the end of the school day. School staff confirmed it. Jessica had been absent all day. That was the moment Sarah felt the fear every parent prays they never experience. She said, "You get a pit in your stomach. You know something is wrong. You know your child has been taken." At 4:23 p.m., Sarah called 911. 8 hours had passed since Jessica left the house. Police knew time was running out. In cases involving children, the first hours are the most important. Statistics show that in many child abduction cases, the worst harm happens within the first 3 hours. Jessica had been gone for more than twice that long. Officers arrived immediately. One went to the Ridgeway home, another went to the school. Others searched the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking questions, checking the area between Jessica's home and the school. Investigators quickly confirmed 3 things. Jessica was last seen at 8:30 a.m. walking alone. She had planned to meet a friend and never arrived, and no one in the neighborhood saw or heard anything strange. In a quiet, safe community, on a school morning, a child had vanished without a sound. Now, investigators had to work through every possibility, but they already knew this wasn't a simple case of a child wandering off. Someone had taken her, and that someone was still out there. Jessica's disappearance had now stretched into a second night, and every hour felt heavier than the last. Families in the neighborhood were waking up, checking their phones for updates, hoping for good news, but finding none. The man who had noticed the backpack the night before stepped outside again. The sun was barely up, the air cold, the ground still damp from the recent snow. The backpack was still there, untouched, sitting in a place that didn't make sense. No bus stop, no houses directly adjacent, no children playing outside at that hour. Something about it felt wrong. This time, he walked over to take a closer look. As he got closer, his stomach dropped. The backpack wasn't just pink and black. It had a familiar name tag, one he recognized from the Amber Alert. It read, Jessica Ridgeway. He didn't touch it. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding, and called the police immediately. Westminster officers arrived within minutes. They taped off the area, photographing the backpack exactly where it lay. Nothing appeared immediately disturbed. No footprints that could be clearly linked, no tire marks that stood out, and no obvious signs of a struggle. The backpack seemed to have been placed there intentionally, not dropped in haste. Inside, investigators found Jessica's water bottle, her clothes, and other personal items she would have taken with her to school. But some things were missing. Jessica's glasses were not inside. Her keychain, which her mother said she always carried, was also gone. The backpack had been wiped down. There were no usable fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that immediately pulled them closer to whoever had taken her. But to detectives, the location of the backpack spoke volumes. It was more than 6 miles from Jessica's home. Jessica could not have walked that distance on her own before school started. Someone had transported it there. Someone wanted it found. Someone wanted to send a message. Crime scene analysts studied the area for hours, marking evidence, looking for fibers, for footprints, for tire marks, for anything that could point them in a direction. Volunteers in the area began to gather quietly behind the police tape, some crying, others hugging their children tightly. The discovery of the backpack didn't answer the biggest question. It only deepened the fear. The search grew more urgent. Investigators broadened the search perimeter around the Superior neighborhood. They knocked on doors again, questioned residents, looked through security cameras. Though in 2012, home surveillance wasn't as common as it is today. Though there was no direct sign of Jessica herself, detectives now believed firmly that she had been taken by someone who knew the area well, someone comfortable enough to drive through neighborhoods and leave the backpack without being seen, someone bold enough to move around while the entire state was on alert. As investigators reviewed the timeline repeatedly, trying to find a missing piece, forensic teams sent the contents of the backpack to the lab for testing. Meanwhile, search efforts intensified even more. Volunteers formed new groups, moving strategically through fields and wooded areas. Some brought their own dogs, hoping their pets might pick up on something the trained dogs missed. Parents held their children's hands tighter, watching them closely, haunted by the possibility that a stranger capable of taking Jessica might still be nearby. But the fear spreading through the community wasn't limited to Westminster. Schools in surrounding counties increased security. Parents waited at bus stops instead of letting their kids walk alone. Strangers looked at each other differently. Every unfamiliar vehicle drew suspicion. Teachers reported students crying in class, asking if someone would take them too. Back at the police command center, chatter filled the room. Maps were marked with red and blue pins showing search areas, timelines, witness calls. Every new piece of information was run through again and again. But one thing was becoming clear. Whoever abducted Jessica had taken significant steps to avoid leaving evidence. They were careful. They were deliberate. Late Sunday afternoon, detectives received a call from one of the volunteer groups searching a drainage ditch west of the area where the backpack was found. They had discovered a small plastic bag. Inside was a piece of clothing, a shirt that belonged to Jessica. Like the backpack, it had been wiped clean. No fingerprints, no fibers, no trace DNA that could be lifted on site. This told investigators two things. The person responsible was moving around, and they were attempting to remove evidence carefully. The community refused to give up hope, but fear pressed harder against everyone's thoughts. The FBI began creating a behavioral profile of the possible abductor. Analysts believed the suspect was likely a male, someone familiar with the area, likely living alone or with someone who didn't question his movements, someone who had possibly offended before or exhibited concerning behavior. The careful wiping of belongings suggested an awareness of forensic techniques, someone who wanted control over how much investigators learned and when. On Monday morning, October 8th, schools reopened with additional officers stationed outside. Counselors were on standby for students who needed comfort. Parents who normally sent their children off with a quick wave now parked their cars, walked their kids to the door, and hugged them for an extra few seconds. Teachers watched their classrooms with a new level of vigilance, their eyes drifting to the door every time someone walked by. Inside Jessica's home, Sarah was barely functioning. She sat with detectives, answering questions over and over, going through the smallest details of Jessica's routines, her habits, her fears. Her voice broke frequently. The guilt consumed her. She kept repeating that she should have walked her daughter to school that morning, that she should have woken up earlier, that she should have known something was wrong. Detectives assured her again and again that none of this was her fault. But guilt is a powerful thing.
and mothers often carry blame even where none exists. Meanwhile, more tips flooded the hotline. Most were false leads, people calling with good intentions but mistaken sightings. A girl with purple glasses at a store, a child walking alone in a different county, a vehicle with out-of-state plates that looked suspicious. Everything had to be checked. Every call mattered. But every time a lead was dismissed, a heaviness settled deeper across the investigation. Investigators also revisited the possibility of a witness, someone who may have seen something without realizing its importance. A car parked in the wrong place, a figure walking quickly, someone stopping suddenly along a route normally empty that early in the morning. But no one had come forward with anything substantial. The route from Jessica's home to school was short and predictable and familiar to everyone who lived there. But somehow, in broad daylight, along a residential street, a 10-year-old girl had vanished without being seen by a single person. That reality terrified everyone. By Tuesday, October 9th, the search had grown into one of the largest efforts the area had ever seen. Helicopters with improved weather conditions finally took flight, scanning fields, open land, and reservoirs. Search and rescue teams brought more specialized dogs. Volunteers stretched out in massive lines across open spaces, walking slowly, scanning every inch of ground. Investigators revisited parks, creeks, pathways, even dumpsters. They searched drainage pipes, storm culverts, abandoned structures. Every location that a child or an abductor could possibly be. But still, nothing. Fear was turning into dread, and dread was turning into a horrifying possibility that no one wanted to accept. Somewhere out there, someone knew exactly where Jessica was, and they had not made a single mistake.
Sunday, October 7th arrived, cold, gray, and covered in fresh snow. People in the Superior neighborhood stepped out of their homes to start their day, unaware that something important had been sitting in plain sight for almost 24 hours. One neighbor, Christine Vandermeer, noticed the backpack that morning during her routine walk. Just like the others before her, she assumed it belonged to a child who lived nearby. It seemed harmless. It was just a backpack lying on the sidewalk, nothing more. Nobody wanted to imagine anything darker. Around 1 p.m., a third neighbor finally decided to take action. Trying to be helpful, this person sent an email to the community listserv, the same digital bulletin board used for lost pets, garage sale announcements, and neighborhood updates. The subject line was simple and innocent: children's backpack found. The message said the bag was found on Andrew Drive and Alpha Court, and that the water bottle inside had the name Jessica Ridgeway written on it. Anyone who recognized the name could come pick it up. The person who sent the message had no idea that they had stumbled onto the most important piece of evidence in the state of Colorado. They weren't following the news closely. They didn't know a 10-year-old girl with that exact name had gone missing 2 days earlier. They were just being a good neighbor. But someone on the community email list recognized the name instantly. Within minutes, they replied to everyone, urging them to call 911 right away. That message changed everything. The original poster read the reply, froze, and realized what they had been holding in their hands. The backpack wasn't lost, it was abandoned, and the child it belonged to was missing. They immediately called the police. Law enforcement arrived at the scene within minutes. The location alone was alarming. Superior was 6.5 miles from Jessica's home in Westminster. It was impossible for a 10-year-old girl to get there on her own, especially when she never even reached her school. This meant one thing: someone had taken her there. Police cars lined the quiet suburban street. Yellow crime scene tape went up around the sidewalk where the bag had been found. Officers and FBI agents walked the area slowly and carefully, photographing every angle before touching anything.
Then they placed the backpack into evidence bags and transported it to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. What they found inside confirmed everyone's worst fears. Jessica's purple glasses were inside the backpack. She needed them to see. Without them, everything more than a few feet away would be a blur. She never took them off except to sleep. She wouldn't have left home without them. She wouldn't have gone anywhere willingly without them. Their presence in the bag told investigators something horrifying. There were clothes inside too. Some were stained with urine. Some smelled strongly of chemicals that could have been chloroform or something similar. There was the water bottle with her name written in black marker. The entire backpack, even after spending a snowy night outside, looked deliberately placed, not thrown or lost. House Sergeant, the chief deputy district attorney for Jefferson County, later explained the meaning behind what was found. The glasses, he said, were the most chilling clue of all. In his words, the glasses tell you she's dead. Someone had chosen what to keep and what to discard. Someone had chosen carefully. To investigators, his point was simple and brutal. Jessica didn't need her glasses anymore, because whoever took her already knew she would never see anything again. DNA from the backpack would later unlock the identity of the person who did this, but on that Sunday afternoon, all they knew was that Jessica had been taken far from her home, and the chances she was still alive were almost gone. The community wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. On Tuesday evening, October 9th, 2012, at about 5 p.m., the nightmare reached a horrific turning point. Search teams were combing through open space areas in Arvada, Colorado, about 7 to 10 miles from Jessica's home in Westminster. Near an abandoned mining shack that had been sitting in the field for decades, they found human remains. Westminster Police spokesman Trevor Matarazzo stood at a press conference at 7:30 p.m. that night. Cameras lined the room. Reporters waited in silence. He chose his words carefully. He said, "We have found remains that we believe may be Jessica Ridgeway. Identity cannot be confirmed at this time." What he didn't reveal was the detail investigators discovered at the scene. The body was not whole. It had been deliberately dismembered. This changed everything. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a panic. This was the act of someone cold, methodical, and deeply disturbed. Someone who had time, privacy, and a level of cruelty that even veteran detectives struggled to comprehend.
The next day, October 12th, DNA testing and dental records confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Jessica Christine Ridgeway. The Amber Alert was canceled at 4:45 p.m. The case was no longer a search. It was now a homicide investigation. Chief Lee Burke addressed the public. "Our focus has changed from the search for Jessica to a mission of justice for Jessica," he said. "We will not rest until her killer is found." Colorado's governor released his own statement. "Our hearts break for the Ridgeway family," he said. "We will dedicate every available resource to finding the person responsible." The final thread of hope that the community had been holding on to was gone. A little girl who loved purple, who loved cheerleading, who told silly knock-knock jokes, was gone forever. Someone had taken her from the world and done unspeakable things, and the entire state wanted answers. 6 days later, on October 16th, more than 3,000 people gathered at Faith Bible Chapel in Arvada to honor Jessica's life. The crowd was a sea of purple. Purple shirts, dresses, ribbons, and ties filled the huge chapel. The governor wore purple. Police officers wore purple pins. Teachers, students, families, and complete strangers all came to honor a 10-year-old girl they never met but felt connected to. Governor Hickenlooper spoke quietly about how every parent in Colorado was holding their children a little tighter. Chief Burke spoke for law enforcement, promising justice. And in the front of the room, surrounded by 3,000 grieving people, Jessica's family sat in the middle of a nightmare that no parent should ever experience.
The attack had taken place at Kentner Lake Park in Westminster, not far from where Jessica was later abducted. A 22-year-old woman had been out for a morning jog along the trail that circles the lake. It was warm that day, around 70 degrees, the kind of comfortable weather that brings people outside after a long stretch of spring rain. The woman jogged the trail often. It was familiar, peaceful, safe. But on that morning, just past 9 a.m., as she ran along the west side of the lake, she noticed a young man approaching her from the opposite direction. He looked about 17 or 18, maybe younger, with dark hair and a slender build. He wore a black t-shirt and jeans. She didn't think much of it at first. Plenty of teenagers used the trail. But as he passed her, he suddenly spun around, grabbed her behind, and dragged her into a wooded area off the trail. The attack happened fast and without warning. The woman fought with everything she had. She screamed, kicked, scratched, twisted her body, trying to break free. The young man tried to silence her. He told her he had a weapon. He tried to force her deeper into the trees, but she refused to stop fighting. At one point, she bit his hand hard enough to make him cry out in pain. Her resistance startled him. It threw him off balance, and in a moment of desperation, she managed to slip out of his grip and run back toward the trail. The attacker ran in the opposite direction and disappeared. The woman, shaking and terrified, called 911. Detectives collected DNA evidence from her clothing and body. They searched the trail and woods. They interviewed people in the area, but no arrest was ever made. Now, months later, Chief Burke was telling the world that the DNA from that attack matched the DNA found on Jessica's remains. The room fell silent as the weight of that information settled in. It meant the killer hadn't started with Jessica. He had tried before. He had failed. And then, on October 5th, he had tried again, this time with a little girl. Chief Burke emphasized that this changed the urgency of the investigation. If the killer had attacked once, then escalated to abducting and murdering a child, what would stop him from attacking again? Reporters asked questions. When was the DNA matched? Was there a suspect? Had anyone been identified from either scene? Burke and Yacone were calm, but firm. They would not reveal operational details. They said they were pursuing every lead. They asked the community to stay alert, to report anything suspicious, no matter how trivial it might seem. The press conference rattled people across Colorado. Parents tightened their routines, joggers changed their routes. Schools reviewed safety procedures. Neighborhoods organized watch groups. The idea that the same person had tried to assault a woman in May, then murdered a child in October was almost too horrifying to process. But for someone sitting at home, that press conference meant something else. It meant the investigation was closing in. It meant the DNA he had left behind twice was now connected. It meant time was running out. Inside the Sig home, Austin listened to the news coverage. He heard the chief's words. He watched the reporters. This was no longer a story happening somewhere out there. It was about him. He knew exactly what the detectives had just realized, and yet no one had shown up at his door. No one had arrested him. His mistake, his dropped cross, had almost caught him, but the lab's mistake had saved him, at least temporarily. His DNA had been lost. He had been crossed off the suspect list. And now, after the press conference, he knew something else. They would test every sample again. They had no choice. Every eliminated suspect would be re-examined. Every piece of evidence would be reviewed. It was only a matter of time. Over the next few days, investigators pushed harder. They retraced every step in the Ridgeway neighborhood. They canvassed parks, trails, and shopping centers. They re-interviewed people whose names had appeared early in the case. They issued more public statements urging vigilance. Crime labs worked around the clock. The pressure was intense. The momentum was building. The community could feel it. Detectives could feel it. Even the killer could feel it. In the middle of that tightening circle, something unexpected happened. Something that would shift the investigation again. Not through evidence, not through DNA, but through guilt. On October 23, 2012, the morning after the press conference, Mindy Sig walked into her kitchen to find her son sitting at the table. Austin looked pale. He looked like he hadn't slept. Mindy noticed his hands were shaking. She asked him what was wrong. Austin didn't answer at first.
He stared down at his hands, the same hands that had dragged a little girl into his car, the same hands that had carried out the unthinkable. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, I need to tell you something." What happened next would stun even seasoned investigators. Mindy, confused and worried, sat across from him. He told her everything. He told her about the cross. He told her about the DNA. He told her about the Memorial Day attack. And then he told her the unimaginable truth about Jessica. Mindy felt her world collapse. Her face went pale. She trembled. She told him he needed to do the right thing. She picked up the phone, her hands unsteady, and dialed 911. At 12:06 p.m., the Westminster Police Department received the call that would break the case open. The dispatcher answered, and Mindy's voice came through the line. Fragile, shaking, struggling to stay composed. "My son wants to turn himself in for the murder of Jessica Ridgeway," she said. Within minutes, patrol cars and unmarked vehicles raced toward the SIG home. Officers approached with caution, but also with urgency. This was the call they had been waiting for, the kind of break that rarely comes in cases like this. They knocked on the door. Mindy answered, her face streaked with tears. Austin came down the stairs slowly, the same way he had when they interviewed him earlier in the month. But this time, there was no calm expression, no awkward attempt to appear helpful. His head was lowered, his shoulders were slumped. He looked defeated. He looked like someone who understood that his life was about to be taken apart piece by piece.
Detectives brought him into custody, read him his rights, and transported him to the police station. There, in a small interview room, Austin sat across from investigators and confessed, calmly, methodically, without emotion. He described how he had grabbed Jessica, how he had taken her to his home, what he had done, how he had disposed of her remains. The details were horrifying, and investigators would later redact many parts to protect the public and Jessica's family. But one thing was clear. The monster they had been searching for was a 17-year-old boy who lived less than a mile away. When the confession ended, detectives stepped out of the room. Some were stunned into silence, others struggled to control their anger. There was no satisfaction in the capture, no relief, only grief. Grief for Jessica, grief for her mother, grief for a community that had prayed for a different ending. Outside the station, news broke quickly. Reporters rushed to the scene. Cameras set up along the sidewalk, parents hugged their children tighter. And in living rooms across Colorado, people tried to understand how a teenager, a kid, could be responsible for something so monstrous. But the investigation wasn't over. Now that they had a confession, detectives needed to verify every detail. They needed to collect evidence from the SIG home. They needed to build a case that would hold up in court. And they needed to prepare themselves for what they were about to find inside that house on Alcure Street. Austin told investigators that these dark thoughts had started years earlier and had slowly grown stronger. He said he had been looking at harmful and illegal material involving children since he was around 12. Over time, he said the material no longer gave him the same feeling, so he looked for things that were even worse. He told detectives this made his thoughts darker, more violent, and harder to control. He said that long before he ever saw Jessica, he had been driving around different neighborhoods in Westminster. Sometimes he went out late at night, sometimes he went out early in the morning. He said he watched children walking to school. He watched joggers on trails. He watched people coming and going from parks. In his own words, he said he was, quote, looking for someone who seemed easy to take. He said he didn't care who it was. He said he wanted a victim, and that he had been thinking about harming someone for months. Austin told detectives that when he attacked the jogger at Kerr Lake in May, he had planned it very carefully. He said he chose a quiet trail on purpose. He said he mixed a chemical at home after reading online how to make something that could knock someone out. He brought a cloth soaked in that chemical and waited for a woman to jog past him. But when he grabbed her, she fought harder than he expected. She hit him several times. She pushed him off. She ran. He told detectives he panicked and ran the other way. That attack, he said, didn't go the way I wanted. He said it made me feel like I needed someone younger, someone smaller, someone who wouldn't be able to fight back the same way. When detectives asked,
why he kept going after the attack failed, Austin said something that chilled everyone in the room. He said, "I felt disappointed. I felt like I didn't finish what I started." After that, he said he spent more time watching children around the neighborhood. He said he drove past Jessica's school many times. He said he saw kids walking alone. He told detectives that on October 5th, when he saw Jessica walking toward the park, he decided that was the moment he had been waiting for. He described the morning in detail. He told detectives he drove out early before most people were awake. He said he parked near the path where children usually walked. He watched Jessica walk past. He said he didn't see anyone else around. That was when he stepped out of his car. Detectives asked him if Jessica said anything. Austin said she might have tried, but he didn't remember her exact words. He said he grabbed her quickly, carried her to his car, and drove away. He said the whole thing happened in seconds. He said she struggled, but not enough to change what he had already planned to do. Austin told detectives he took Jessica back to his house. His mother was at work. No one else was home. He said he brought her into the basement. He said that once they were inside, he did not change his mind. He said he never thought about letting her go. He said he had been planning something like this for too long. The detectives asked him why he chose Jessica. Austin shrugged. He said she was just the one who was there. There was no sign of remorse, no sign of guilt, no sign of fear. He spoke calmly, as if talking about someone he didn't know. As the interview continued, he described what he did to Jessica in the basement. The exact details were too horrific for investigators to release publicly, but what he admitted was enough to understand his mindset, enough to understand his intentions, enough to understand the level of violence and control he wanted to feel. Austin told detectives that after Jessica was gone, he panicked for a short time, afraid the police would arrive quickly. But then he said a strange calmness spread through him. He said he felt relieved. He said the thoughts he had been struggling with for years suddenly felt quiet. He said he spent hours in the basement after that, trying to decide what to do next. He said he knew he could not keep Jessica there. He knew he needed to hide what he had done. He described how he tried to clean up the basement. He described trying to remove evidence. He described going through her belongings one by one. He said he kept her backpack for a while because he wasn't sure what to do with it. He told detectives he eventually decided to take the remains to a field and leave them there. He said he went at night. He said he wore gloves. He said he parked far away. He said he didn't think anyone saw him. He said he left in silence.
When detectives asked him about the wooden cross that police had found at the scene, Austin admitted it had fallen off the cord he wore around his neck. He said he didn't notice until later. He said he knew the cross being found was dangerous, but he hoped no one would connect it to him. He said he didn't think the police would ever come to his house. He said he believed he had gotten away with everything. Detectives then asked about the DNA. Austin hesitated for the first time. He asked if the DNA from the Kerr Lake attack and from Jessica had come back with a full match yet. When detectives told him yes, Austin closed his eyes. He said very quietly, "So that's it then." When they asked why he slept in his mother's bed the night before he confessed, Austin said he was terrified the police would show up at any moment. He said he knew everything was closing in. He said his body felt sick, like he couldn't breathe. He said he wanted to be near his mother. He said he didn't want to be alone when everything ended. The detectives interviewing him said it was one of the strangest interviews they had ever conducted. Austin spoke calmly through almost every detail. He never cried. He never showed fear of prison. The only time he showed any emotion was when he talked about telling his mother. He said he felt guilty about what his confession would do to her, but he did not express guilt about Jessica. He told detectives, "I knew you would get me eventually." When detectives asked him why he decided to confess so suddenly, Austin took a long breath. Then he said something that left everyone in the room silent.
"She was everywhere," he said. "Every time I closed my eyes, she was there. I couldn't stop seeing her. I couldn't stop hearing her." After several hours, detectives ended the interview. Austin was placed in a holding cell. His mother stayed at the police station for hours, crying in the hallway. Officers tried to comfort her, but nothing could change the reality. Her 17-year-old son had confessed to one of the most heartbreaking crimes in Colorado history. Outside the police station, news cameras waited. The community that had spent weeks searching for Jessica was about to learn the truth. A teenager from their own neighborhood had taken her life, and the story was only beginning to unfold. On Memorial Day, May 28th, he tried to take a jogger at Kerr Lake. He had made a chemical mixture after searching online for instructions. He soaked a cloth with that mixture and waited on the trail for someone to pass. When the jogger came close, he grabbed her from behind and tried to press the cloth over her face, but she fought back. She pushed, kicked, and managed to escape. Austin later said this moment taught him something. He said he realized he needed someone smaller, someone who could not fight the same way. 4 months later, on the morning of October 5th, Austin said he woke up with a feeling he could not control. He said it was so strong that it pushed everything else out of his mind. He grabbed his gold Jeep, drove poor Jessica's neighborhood, and parked on a side street. He sat in the back seat, ducked down where no one could see him. He told police it was all random. Random place, random time, random victim. He said he was hunting. Jessica was walking alone that morning, tossing small snowballs into the air and catching them as she moved. She was just being a kid, smiling and playing. She had no idea someone was watching her. She had no idea someone had already chosen her. As Jessica walked past his Jeep, Austin jumped out from the back seat and grabbed her. She screamed, but no one was close enough to hear. He dragged her into the Jeep and tied her hands and feet with zip ties he had brought with him. Later, during his confession, Austin said, "The second I pulled her into my car, I knew she was gone. There was no other ending." He drove for 20 to 30 minutes with Jessica crying in the back. She begged, she screamed, she asked for help, but nothing changed his mind. He finally drove to his mother's house just a mile from where he had taken her and parked inside the garage. The house was empty. His mother was at work. He carried Jessica upstairs to his bedroom. What Austin described next was disturbing, and it made investigators question whether he was telling the full truth. He claimed he cut off the zip ties. He claimed he let her sit on the bed. He claimed he turned on cartoons to calm her. He said he kept telling her everything would be okay, that she would go home soon. According to him, Jessica asked him questions, soft and scared. "Who are you? Do you know my mom? When can I go home?" Austin said he lied each time, telling her whatever he thought would keep her quiet. He said she had been so afraid that she wet herself, so he gave her clean clothes, a white shirt and black shorts. He said he cut her hair, but never explained why. Then he said he asked her to turn around. When she faced away from him, he wrapped his hands around her neck and took her life. He said it took 2 to 3 minutes. Austin told detectives he did not hurt her in any other way. But based on everything found on his computer, based on the violent images he had collected for years, investigators doubted him. Prosecutors eventually added charges that showed they believed he was hiding parts of the truth. After taking her life, Austin said he carried her to the bathtub. He said he did what he had learned from crime stories and online searches. He said people who never get caught are the ones who know how to make bodies disappear. He said he removed her clothing, cleaned the area, and began taking her apart. He described each step calmly, as if talking about something he had done many times before.
He said he put her torso in garbage bags and hid them in the pool house behind his home. He kept some parts inside the house. He tried flushing other parts down the toilet, but the pipes clogged. He pulled everything back out and put them in bags. Days later, he drove to Arvada and left her torso in an open field near an old mining shack. Then he drove to another town and placed her backpack and belongings on a sidewalk far from where he had taken her. He said he left items that would tell police she was gone: her glasses, clothes that carried the smell of fear, and her water bottle. The wooden cross found beside her had belonged to him. It had fallen off the cord he wore around his neck. When detectives asked him why he did all of this, he struggled to answer. He talked about urges he couldn't stop, about feelings that grew stronger each year. He said it started small and kept getting worse. He said he didn't realize how far it had gone until it was too late. Toward the end of the interview, a detective asked him how he felt about any of it. Austin stayed quiet for a long time before saying, "I don't really feel anything. I know I should. I know that probably makes me a monster, but I just don't feel what I'm supposed to feel." Prosecutors would later use that sentence again and again, calling it proof that he was dangerous and should never walk free. After the confession, investigators searched the house and the Jeep. What they found matched nearly every detail Austin had given them. In his room, they found his computer. Forensic analysts found thousands of harmful images involving children, including violent content. The files went back years, proving he had been collecting them since he was around 12. His search history showed instructions on how to make chemicals, how to restrain victims, how to avoid forensic evidence, and how serial offenders got rid of bodies. In the garage, police found cleaning supplies that tested positive for blood and strong chemical cleaners. The amount he used showed he spent a long time trying to remove evidence. In the crawl space, exactly where he said they would be, police found more remains wrapped in plastic under insulation. In the home's plumbing, they found tissue that matched Jessica, proof that he had tried to flush parts of her away. Austin's Jeep was processed carefully. Investigators found broken zip ties, fibers from Jessica's clothing, her hair, chemical residue consistent with the mixture he made, and small traces of blood that matched her DNA. Almost everything he confessed lined up with the evidence. But the investigation also revealed a major problem: the missing DNA sample. The first time Austin spoke with the FBI, he gave a DNA sample voluntarily. That sample was lost. When the empty envelope came back, investigators thought Austin was eliminated as a suspect. If he hadn't confessed, and if his mother hadn't called 911, it's possible he could have slipped away from the case completely. Even experienced investigators admit that human mistakes can change the direction of a case.
On October 24th, one day after his arrest, Austin appeared in court. He was charged as an adult. The list of charges was long: murder, kidnapping, violent offenses, and multiple counts related to the harmful material found on his computer. They also added charges for the attack at Kerr Lake. Austin faced about 20 felony counts in total. Because he was 17 at the time, only a few months away from being 18, prosecutors had a choice to make: treat him as a juvenile or charge him as an adult. The crimes were too severe, too calculated, too violent. They chose to charge him as an adult, which meant he could spend the rest of his life in prison. But even then, the law had limits they would soon have to face. In 2005, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Roper v. Simmons that it was unconstitutional to execute anyone who was under 18 at the time of their crime. Because of this ruling, Austin could not receive the death penalty no matter how disturbing his actions were. At his first court appearance, he stood beside his public defender, silent and small in an orange jail jumpsuit. He kept his head down through most of the hearing. When the judge asked if he understood the charges against him, he answered in a quiet voice, "Yes." After the hearing, Jefferson County District Attorney Peter Weir spoke to the media. He said this was one of the most disturbing cases he had seen in his 30-year career. He talked about the level of planning, the cruelty, and the lack of remorse, and said these things would all be considered as the case moved forward. Westminster Police Chief Lee Berg also spoke, saying that Jessica's family could finally begin the long and painful process of healing. He said nothing could bring Jessica back, but knowing the person responsible was finally in custody gave at least a small amount of comfort. Jessica's mother, Sarah Ridgeway, did not speak to the public right away. Through a spokesperson, she thanked the community and law enforcement for their support and asked for privacy as the family grieved. Austin's father, Robert Sigg, released his own statement. He wrote that he had no words for the pain the Ridgeway family was experiencing. He said his family was devastated to learn that his son had been arrested for such a terrible act. He called the situation a tragedy for both families and asked for prayers not only for the Ridgeways, but also for Mindy, Austin's mother, whose brave decision to turn in her own child had helped bring the case to a resolution. Mindy herself would not speak publicly for the next 13 years. The choice she made would stay with her for the rest of her life. Austin's trial was originally scheduled for October 1, 2013, almost exactly 1 year after Jessica's murder. His defense attorneys told him to plead not guilty so they could build a full defense. They planned to focus on his age, his psychological struggles, the violent content he had been exposed to, and possibly an insanity defense, arguing that he could not fully understand the wrongfulness of what he had done. But 2 days before the trial date, Austin stood before Judge Stephen Munier and made a decision that shocked even his own lawyers. He said, "I want to change my plea to guilty on all counts." His attorneys quickly asked to speak privately with the judge. They explained that they had strongly advised him not to do this. They believed they could argue for lesser charges or at least reduce the severity of his sentence. But Austin refused. He said he did not want a trial. Judge Munier questioned him carefully. He asked if Austin understood what pleading guilty meant, if he knew he could receive the maximum sentence, and if anyone had pressured him. Austin said he understood everything. He said this was his choice. He said he was pleading guilty of his own free will. Later, District Attorney Peter Weir told the media that there had been no plea deal and no concessions. Austin had simply chosen to plead guilty to every charge. Many people wondered why. Some believed Austin wanted to avoid a public trial, one where every detail of what he did to Jessica would be shared in graphic detail. Others thought he had already accepted that he would spend the rest of his life in prison. And another theory was that Austin just wanted control. By pleading guilty, he alone decided his fate instead of a jury. Whatever the reason, the outcome was clear. Austin Sigg would be sentenced for the murder of Jessica Ridgeway and the attempted murder of another victim without the need for a trial. The sentencing hearing took place on November 19, 2013. The courtroom was full. Media, police, community members, and Jessica's family all gathered to watch. Before the judge announced the sentence, several people spoke. Sarah Ridgeway stood at the podium and looked directly at Austin for the first time since learning he had killed her daughter. She held a written statement in her hands, but when it was time to read it, she made another decision. She said, "I'm actually not going to say anything today, because I don't think the defendant has the right to hear how he affected me, my family, or who Jessica was. Once we walk out of this courtroom, we will not remember his name. We will remember Jessica and the legacy she created." Then she returned to her seat. Her silence said more than any words could. She refused to let Austin cause even one more moment of suffering. Jessica's grandmother also addressed the court. She said Jessica had been the rock of their family, the light in every room. She said they would never fully recover from losing her, but they would keep living because that is what Jessica would have wanted. Several law enforcement officers who had worked the case spoke next. They talked about the emotional toll it took on them. Some said that even officers who had seen many disturbing cases were deeply shaken by what Austin had done. When the defense's turn, Austin's attorneys presented their mitigating arguments. They said that Austin had been exposed to violent content at a very young age, which they believed changed his development. They mentioned Mindy's fall during pregnancy, the use of a vacuum extractor at birth, and suggested that these things could have caused brain injury. They talked about the troubled home life, the divorce, and the criminal history of Austin's father. And they argued that because he was 17 during the crime, he should be given at least a chance at parole someday. But prosecutors pushed back on everything. They called psychologist Dr. Anna Salter, who said Austin had been raised in a supportive home, had not been abused, and had access to therapy but refused to participate. She said his actions showed clear planning, clear understanding, and clear intent. She said Austin Sigg had empathy for no one but himself. He understood that what he was doing was wrong. That is why he took such careful steps to avoid getting caught. He simply did not care about Jessica's suffering. The FBI's behavioral analysis also labeled Austin as extremely dangerous, with a high risk of committing more harm if ever released. District Attorney Peter Weir spoke again, telling the judge that the founders of this country did not write any rule saying that when a young man kidnaps, harms, murders, and dismembers a child, everything but the murder should be forgiven. He said Austin was dangerous, and the only way to protect the community was to keep him locked up forever. Finally, Austin was allowed to speak. Many expected him to apologize. Many thought he might show remorse. Instead, he said just 4 words, "I have nothing to say." Judge Stephen Mooninger then read his decision. His voice was calm but sharp. He told Austin that he had been convicted of 20 counts connected to the abduction, assault, murder, and dismemberment of Jessica Ridgeway, as well as the attempted murder of another girl. He said the case showed a level of darkness rarely seen. He said Austin hunted Jessica like she was prey. He said Austin showed no mercy, treated her body with no respect, and showed no real remorse. Then the judge said something that stayed with everyone in the room. Evil is apparently real. It was present in our community on October 5th, 2012. On that day, its name was Austin Sigg. This case demanded a life sentence. Because Austin was still under 18 at the time of the crime, the judge was required by law to give him a chance at parole after 40 years for the murder charge. But the judge did not have to make his other sentences run at the same time. He could stack them. He took a slow breath and announced the punishment. On the count of first-degree murder, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. For the kidnapping, sexual assault, sexual exploitation of a child, robbery, and attempted murder, another 86 years to be served after the life sentence. This meant Austin would need to serve at least 126 years before he could even be considered for parole. Because he was only 18 years old, the judge made it clear that Austin would never leave prison alive. Austin didn't react. His face was blank, emotionless, as if the words didn't matter. The judge continued speaking. "You will be remanded to the Colorado Department of Corrections to serve your sentence. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." Then the sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. Austin Reed Sigg was taken away in shackles and led out of the room. Soon he would be moved to a maximum security prison where he would spend the rest of his natural life. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Ridgeway made a short statement. "Justice has been served today. Jessica's killer will never be free again. We can now focus on honoring Jessica's memory and keeping her spirit alive through the foundation and programs created in her name. Thank you to everyone who has supported our family through this nightmare." With that, the long legal process came to an end. To understand how a 17-year-old could commit something so terrible, we have to look closely at Austin's background and psychological development. Austin was born on January 17, 1995, to Robert and Mindy Sigg. His childhood seemed mostly normal until around the year 2000 when his parents divorced. Austin was about 5 years old then. After the divorce, he lived mainly with his mother Mindy in Westminster. His father stayed involved, but struggled with drugs, alcohol, and repeated arrests. When Austin was 12, in 2008,
Mindy found child abuse material on his computer. She was shocked and terrified. She immediately looked for help and took him to a faith-based counselor who worked with teenagers struggling with compulsive sexual behavior. During therapy, Austin wrote in his journal that he had an addiction and wanted it to stop. The counselor worked with him for months, using religious teachings and cognitive behavioral therapy to help him change. Both parents tried to support the plan. They restricted his computer use and monitored his activities. For a short time, it looked like he was improving. But the progress didn't last. Within months, Austin was again viewing child abuse material, and the content grew darker and more violent. He began watching videos of children being tortured, strangled, or killed. He became obsessed with snuff videos, clips that claimed to show real murders. Later, he told police it started with regular pornography, then it got worse and worse, more violent things. It was such a slow progression, I didn't even notice it getting harder. It took hold of me, and it just started growing. Experts say this pattern is common in compulsive pornography addictions, especially for kids exposed at a young age. The brain builds tolerance, pushing the person to seek more extreme content for the same effect. It's similar to drug addiction, but millions of people struggle with addiction and never harm anyone. So what made Austin different? Psychologists identified several red flags. Austin lacked normal empathy. Whether that began biologically or developed over time, isolation made it worse. After he dropped out of school, he barely interacted with anyone. He had no friends, no girlfriend, no social group. His world became a dark, private space inside his bedroom filled with violent videos and fantasies. He also developed sexual sadism, a condition where a person feels arousal specifically from the suffering of others. Violent fantasies alone are not uncommon, but in sexual sadism, the pain becomes the main source of pleasure. Austin also showed a dangerous combination: poor impulse control, but strong planning abilities. He knew what he wanted to do was wrong. That's why he studied how to avoid being caught, but he still chose to act. His interest in mortuary science, a field normally built on respect for the dead, instead fed into his morbid fascinations. Death and decomposition became something he studied rather than feared. And importantly, he didn't grow up in an abusive environment. He wasn't beaten, neglected, starved, or raised in chaos. His mother was loving and involved. His father, despite his issues, maintained a relationship. He had food, shelter, medical care, and counseling when needed. This challenges the common assumption that a person must experience trauma to become violent. Sometimes there is no clear external cause. Sometimes a person develops into someone capable of terrible things without any one event explaining it. Austin often told police he didn't know why he did what he did. He repeated that something just took hold of him. But he still made choices. He chose to continue seeking darker content. He chose to research chloroform. He chose to drive around looking for victims. He chose Jessica. Mindy Sigg lived quietly for 13 years after turning her son in. She moved away, changed her number, refused interviews, and tried to disappear from public life. She carried the weight of knowing her call to 911 saved other children, but also sent her son to prison forever. In October 2025, she finally agreed to speak publicly in an interview with CNN. She talked about the moment Austin confessed: horror, disbelief, like this cannot be happening. She described overwhelming guilt, not because she caused anything, but because she brought him into the world. She admitted she suffered depression and suicidal thoughts in the months after his arrest. She said, "I'd be driving and think about running my car off the road." She felt like I should have known somehow, even though logically, I know I couldn't have. When she was asked what she would say to the Ridgeway family, her voice was steady. "I would give my life to change what happened. I would trade my life for Jessica. If I could go back and prevent it, even if it meant my own death, I would do it in a heartbeat." Mindy also revealed she has not spoken to Austin since the day he was arrested. She said she couldn't face him, and she didn't believe she would get the truth from him anyway. She needs something, some explanation that makes sense, and he can't give me that. When she was asked what she thought of her son now, she struggled. "I don't know the person who did those things."
That wasn't the child I raised. That little boy is gone, and at some point, he became someone I didn't recognize. The Ridgeway family has shown an incredible grace toward her. Sarah Ridgeway has said many times that she does not blame Mindy. For her to think of our child over her own was amazing. There's nothing she did that caused this. She also lost a son. Jessica's grandmother felt the same way Mindy did. She said her heart went out to her. Their entire family felt compassion for Austin's mother. They thought about her often. She said that if the court had allowed it, they would have hugged Mindy that day. Because no one truly won in that courtroom. One mother lost her daughter, the other lost her son to something dark inside him. This shared kindness, even after everything, showed how strong the human heart can be, even when it has been broken.